a house thing. It's 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 a house thing.
Hello, thank you for joining me, Heather Hilda Darling, on Let's Talk Property today. Radio Reverb 97.2 FM and DAB. Let's Talk Property is sponsored by Callaway's Residential Sales and Lettings. I've got a great programme ahead for you today. I'm talking to Grainne Gilmore. Grainne is Head of Research at Zoopla, one of the UK's well-known property portals. Grainne spends her time in lots and lots of data, and it's data that actually property investors, buyers, sellers and tenants are getting really greedy for. But how useful is this data? Where can we obtain it? How valuable is market insight? Now, I'm really looking forward to this next hour because we're talking about property, and that's something certainly that James and I love talking about. And I'm hoping to find that Grainne enjoys it as well, working in the industry. But first of all, I'd like to get to know a little bit about Grainne. So, Grainne, can you tell us how long have you been doing what you're doing now, and where did it all come from?
Hi there. I've been working in research, so I'm now head of research at Zoopla, and I've been working in the research kind of sector within housing for about 9 years. And it all came about because I started off in my first job, first journalism job at Bloomberg, and then moved to the Times, where I was for about a decade. And over that time, I wrote about personal finances, about mortgages, and then I moved to the economics desk, and I really picked up speed on the housing market and obviously all the other economic activity that was happening at the time. And that was about the time of the global financial crisis. So it was a pretty busy desk to be on. And from there, about 2 or 3 years later, I moved to Knight Frank. And the head of research there offered me a position in a sort of newly created role as head of UK residential research. So it was a bit of a leap over from pure journalism to really trying to share the data and insights from the property industry with a wider audience. And then about a year ago, I moved to Zoopla. And the breadth of data that's available at Zoopla is unrivaled. So it's really been a case of me catching up, seeing what we can do with all this wonderful data that we have to really help consumers, any sort of home buyers, sellers, investors, really try to get to grips with what's going on in their market, what might be happening next. And also for our agents as well.
Well, I think that's a wonderful way the market's moved. I mean, obviously, I started in property a long, long time ago, when any time I had to do any research, it was traipsing through books, it was looking at our own primary research more than anything else as well, and lots of sixth senses and gut instincts. So obviously, technology has made us go forward in leaps and bounds with data and analysis and research. How much has that changed the industry that you're working in?
Oh, very much so. I think on every single front, on residential side, on the commercial real estate side, and the expectations around the level of data that is available, especially as big investors come into the market, that they're wanting really granular data on various aspects of the market. But for you and I, thinking about maybe making our next move, it's wonderful that we have all this access to this additional information. The government has kept up to a certain extent in the official records. Land registries are always trying to innovate, but everything is a bit slower coming through from them. So where we can fill a gap, I think, is give a sort of first impression of what's going on from our wonderful models that we have with all of the data that we have. So we can sort of fill that time gap and give a pretty up-to-date assessment of what is happening for individual people in terms of the value of their own home, and then putting them in contact with agents who can also help them with that.
What I love about research is the fact that you've got the historic data And then when it comes to the forecasting and the trending, I suppose, for want of a better word, how do you balance the two out? I mean, clearly the land registry figures are historic, as I've just said. Do you watch the curves go up? Are they flat curves? Are they round curves? Are they upward and then down curves? I mean, they must be looking like a roller coaster over the years.
So we are constantly refining the models that we use. We have our own house price index. And as you say, it's a balance of what ingredients you put into that mixing bowl. So a bit of historic data, a bit of current data of what's going on, but also because of the top of funnel, we like to call it, information that we have. So we can see people's initial interest. We can see where they're looking at property. And when we put all of that together and come up with a model, but then what we can do is test it backwards, test if it works, put the model up as if it was the first time we were seeing it against the data we know happened. And it scores very well. So that's the R&D side of what we do in the research and insight team.
I mean, it sounds very cold sometimes, doesn't it? The fact that we've got data for property, but we live in our homes. We've now been working in our homes over the last 12 months. How do you marry the two together?
It's a really good question. And we talk a lot at Zoopla about the marriage of heart and head. So there's financial decisions that will be driven by financial realities. And that might happen in many other aspects. Which savings account do you choose? It's not going to be, the colour of the branding, probably. It's like, who's got the best interest rate? But when it comes to a home, you've got to love it as well. It's where your family will be. It's where you will be. It's where you'll spend all your time. We've all spent a lot of time working in it as well. So there is definitely a marriage. And I'd say heart and head come to the fore at different stages of the process. So when you're really getting to the nitty gritty of your mortgage offer, head first, what can I afford? And then when you're walking into the property and falling in love with it and saying, I think we might need to stretch the budget here, that's the head, that's the heart taking over. So I think it's a mixture of both. And I definitely think we shouldn't underestimate that. A lot of people can look through some of the shorter term impacts. If you're about to buy, you're very concerned with what's happening now. But if you've just bought and you're happy there for the next couple of years, you're looking through the short term trends to the medium term.
I mean, we in agency talk a lot about, life cycles and the way people start at the beginning and then because they need an extra room and et cetera, et cetera. But you're looking at it from a different perspective, aren't you? The sort of the ongoing relationships of people and their own property.
Absolutely. So there's that kind of very personal relationship. And then we're looking on a more macro level at the interplay between the different sectors. If there's something's happening locally in a rental market, what does that mean? What's the knock-on impact for housing, for the sales market in that area? If you've got new development coming in, what does that mean? So there's macro elements to it as well as the very personal element of come, look at your home, check its value, be on that ownership journey with us at Zoopla, and we can advise you as to what's going on in the market.
Yeah, I mean, just on that, I think we were just talking about the tools that are available for the consumer, and I think Zoopla has done a lot of work about how they engage with the consumer and all the insights and the tools that they provide them that's relevant for them for their search and their journey. That you've got smart searches, you can use keywords to prioritise your search. There's several, but also what I like about Zoopla, as you touched on it earlier, is that you also provide another level of data and tools for the agents who can then help reinforce guiding people through those steps. And I think there's a real good mix going on there. And more so than ever, we're finding people really wanting to know the detail and really questioning some of the detail constructively so they make a real, informed decision. And I think I always encourage people to create an account and log on to, the Zoopla, facility, because you get more than just searching for a property, which is really helpful.
Oh, yes, exactly. You've hit the nail on the head. So very keen to keep that conversation going where we've got data and information for you, even if you've just bought and you want to be in your property for the next 5 years. We still want to keep providing you with the most up-to-date information that we can. It's definitely a journey there for the whole experience of buying, owning your home, and then the next time you come to sell, we want to be there for all parts of that journey.
That is where the industries needs to go to move towards, rather than just this very short interaction and thank you very much and goodbye. It needs to be this keep nurturing and educating, informing lettings as well as sales. So I think it's something that just continuously will be developed with all the prop tech and all those facilities that are coming up at us from all angles.
Now, my company accountant, when I spoke to her earlier, I said, "Oh, you sound very happy today." She said, "Yes, I'm doing figures today. I'm doing numbers and I'm doing month ends and I'm doing this, that and the other." What is it that you love about your work, Grainne? Is it data sets? Is it actually getting the reports out there? Do you just roll your sleeves up when another report is ready to write? How does it happen?
I'd say it's a mixture of both. I hope that's not a cop-out, but the data sets we have are unrivaled. And I have to say, some of the moments of joy is seeing some of my super talented colleagues get to grips with that data and watch what they can do with it. So I just ask a very kind of offbeat question perhaps, or somebody else does, and then somehow this data comes together and works in such a way that it can really tell us something quite new about the market. So there's that aspect of it which I adore when that comes together. But then the second part is writing it and sharing it with everyone. So we've just put our latest house price index out this morning, and just sharing those and getting the responses for people seeing data and seeing the data that we've got in a slightly different way. So we've talked about how much the market is speeded up, how fast things are moving, how fast flats are selling, how fast houses are selling right across the country, regional breakdown. So hopefully useful information for all of our buyers, sellers, investors and agents.
And obviously a lot of this is fueled by people being kept in their homes, now looking, that you call it the search for space.
Yeah.
What sort of space is it they're looking for? You've probably got more data than we have on that.
It's a mixture of everything. But what we saw at the beginning of the first lockdown is the rise in demand for homes. We saw it within weeks of the first lockdown. We could see this demand building. At that stage, the industry was still shut down. And so as soon as it opened up, we knew there was going to be a surge in activity, and that came to the fore. And then once we unpicked the data, it just went on for a month or two. It's more than pent up demand here. This is continuing, and it has continued at that high level. We then got the stamp duty holiday, which of course gave it another boost. But it continued at that high level right through to the beginning of this year, where people perhaps had no expectation of a stamp duty holiday anymore. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, then announced there would be an extension. So those people will benefit, which is great news. But that level, that drumbeat of activity, we can see that the real demand, 3-bed homes, outside space, gardens. So there's a cohort of buyers who are active in the market, and some of whom we think may not have had any intention of moving at the beginning of 2020. But with homeschooling, with working from home, they just feel, I want to live somewhere else. Also, if they're office-based, they may not have to commute to the same level in the future. Some businesses, Goldman Sachs said everyone's back into the office when this ends, but some people have said, no, we're embracing flexi working now. So if you've only got to commute 3 days a week and not 5, the opportunity is you could live slightly further away from the office, perhaps. A lot of people won't do that. They're attached with schools or family networks. But for the cohort of buyers who are doing that, we can see that they're looking for houses, larger houses, 3, 4, 5-bed homes. And that's actually pushed up the price growth for houses faster than flats over the last 12 months.
So presumably, if suddenly all these bigger companies are asking all their employees to come back to work, that might show in the figures as well, that suddenly, because they're not 100% in their homes, they're suddenly, actually, we don't need to move now because I'm in the office again 3, 4, 5 days a week, and I'm quite happy with my little patch of green out the back. Are you likely to see those sorts of changes coming forward as well?
Potentially. I'd say it's going to be much more evident in the rental market, because things move much more quickly there, because you're just on a year tenancy, or beyond a year you can move with relatively short notice. So some people might make that decision, but for people who are buying, I think they will have looked through the end of COVID. If they're looking for a longer term investment, I just mean in terms of, there'll be a lot of heart in there as well, but for head purposes, they'll be thinking that we're going to stay here for a year or 5 years. So they will have looked through and made that decision. And there's enough people who've been active in that way to think that they're probably going to stick with that as the year come. It'll be very dependent on the businesses they work for and what they expect to happen through the rest of 2021.
Yes, of course it will. Now, do you have any favourite tasks that you like doing during the month? Is it the beginning of the month when perhaps the figures come by? Is it when people are emailing you saying, my gosh, you've got this right? Does government get involved with you in your research as well? Because clearly they have to plan lots of areas as to where they're going to build, how they're going to change the planning laws maybe. What do you like doing best of all?
I like speaking to our consumers, speaking to our customers, so agents, new build developers. And so there's kind of regular forums where I'm sharing our data with them and then hearing their questions afterwards, or they might email me afterwards, and just to see if we can help them in some regard. That's always lovely and exciting to do. Hopefully, if I've got it right, though, I will have answered all the questions before they ask them. I haven't quite nailed it yet, but we're getting there. That's something I really enjoy doing.
You've already alluded to the fact that obviously lockdown has changed people's lives. What would you say the biggest change in their relationship with property is to start with? And then afterwards, how has it affected their lifestyles?
We've touched on it a little bit already, but this reassessment of home and what it's used for. So we typically, lots of busy office-based workers or shop-based if they're in retail or hospitality, home is a sort of refuge when you're not at work. And if it works for the weekends and the evenings, that's great. But that's turned on its head. So loads of people have been using it as their a basis to do their work and to school children if they have any. And so it's really caused a real reassessment of home, we think, in many regards. Home is just as valuable and just as loved, but in some cases we think that this search for space has been kind of precipitated by people saying, actually, for all of these things I'm doing right now, or even before, and I didn't really think about it, this home, I want to be somewhere else, or I want to live in a slightly different space. So it's sort of changed the relationship to that extent. And the rise in searches that we see now for home offices or studies suggests that people are, even through the end of the pandemic and as the vaccines roll out, and please God, we get back to some, sort of form of normality by the end of the year, people are still thinking about that kind of working from home element, which perhaps wasn't present at the beginning of 2020.
When people are looking for outside space, do they make a definition between, for example, I want a flat with a balcony, or I want a house with a garden, or I just want a property close to some green space? Because actually parks and gardens and all that add up, don't they, to this outside space that we're all craving. And we're very lucky down in Sussex. We've got the sea at one side and we've got the South Downs the other side. So we have got that green space and the coastal routes as well. For those living in inner cities, for example, where perhaps there isn't quite so many parks and gardens, it must be dire having lived through the lockdown.
I think certainly we know the parks, wherever they are, have been massively popular during the lockdown for people going to their local green space, wherever that is. But I agree with you that the gardens are very important. Balconies are important for people with flats, but also adjacent outside space. But we can see in areas where activity has picked up from relatively perhaps a lower base that we would have seen in March 2020. Coastal areas, very popular. And as you say, areas close to areas of outstanding natural beauty. Now, switching from city centre living to living, a 5-hour commute from London, if you're based in a London job, some people have chosen to do that, but that will have to come with probably larger lifestyle changes than just commuting 3 days a week. So there's variations on it. We see a real rise in demand in the wider suburbs and the wider commuter zones. And so there you're talking about a mixture probably of access to green space, but also personal gardens as well.
Just a bit of a break from the dawn.
Radio Reverb 97.2 FM.
The effect on new builds, if you like, where possibly they're putting in more communal gardens, more communal seating areas. Does that all filter through all your market research as well?
That will show up when things are being listed for sale. That's certainly an aspect of the property that I'm sure developers would want to highlight, that there is this access to green space. But developers are it's becoming more of a feature to have greenery, to have trees in and around these developments. I think that's been a a trend we've seen over the last 5 years at least. Yeah.
Some of the stuff that we've experienced on the ground is that we talk about, you mentioned it earlier, that people want to have the home as a place where they rest and relax away from work, and it's taken away the requirement for outside space. I've had quite a lot of conversations with not just colleagues but customers and clients that said they really struggle to have their home office when they're trying to homeschool, where they haven't got a study, and they want a place to close the door and actually feel that they've left work and then gone to the home. And that has really been quite a lot of conversations that I've had. And we had obviously the property market really remained open for majority of these lockdowns. We had a very small period where we did, but as long as we could do it virtually and safely, we were remain open. And I think it was in the second lockdown, we had this particular rental property that had 3 bedrooms, outside space, and was near the sea. So it had all of these features, and we had in about 7 days 40 inquiries for people that wanted to come and rent, or they wanted to view it virtually. And all of them really only wanted 2 bedrooms, but that 3rd bedroom was going to be their office because they were going to be working from home, and it had outside space. And we was just inundated. And that was just a very small micro example of when you've got all of those factors, and it was a flat and it was rental, so it isn't such a long-term commitment. But the demand for people that wanted to get out of maybe just a 2-bedroom where it had no outside space and no office, it's just unbelievable, really. A lot of disappointed people, and that property style is now, even today, we could let alone sell it very, very fast.
Such good points that you make there, and flats with access to gardens have been extremely popular. We've seen through our data as well, but also that we've seen a rise in searching for home offices, but a lot of that rise will people just be looking for the extra bedroom. They won't say necessarily this is for an office, but we just know if they're coming from a 2-bed and looking for a 3-4 bed, that might possibly be, because as you say, the door can be very important psychologically as well as
You took me back there, James. I think when I was in my teens studying for my O-levels, we lived in this tiny little house, and it had like a through lounge and dining room, and we had to sit at the dining room table to do our homework. And my mum had these really thick velvet curtains that she used to pull across so that we could do our homework. I mean, we could still hear the television, etc. So, Oh my goodness me. Using Zoopla as a tool as we go through things. So somebody moves into a property, and now I've moved 22 times in my lifetime. I know it's a huge amount of times. So if you move into a property, how quickly can you find out whether the price you've paid has increased or decreased? Is it 6 months, 12 months? So then you can start planning your next move.
So on Zoopla, we have a house price estimate tool. So obviously you can contact a local agent to get a valuation of your home as well. But that's basically live all the time. So if you register with us and claim your home, so tell us that's where you live, you can then keep a running tally on it and check in regularly to see how it's going.
Well, that's great. I mean, we use it all the time. Obviously, we've been having to appraise rentals and sales without actually seeing the properties, but the information that comes through, the address, the postcode, the number of receptions, bedrooms, the square footage even, that is all very important information for us to get a sense. And, you can't always express what the demand is going to be, although you do get tools where you've got a high, this is highly expected, isn't it? Because you've had lots of sales going through. So I think you're quite right. It's not just when people are thinking, oh, well, I'll just go and see what my house is worth. I think, to plan ahead, because it's not easy to just put your house on the market, sell, and then plan it out. Conveyancing is taking so much longer. You've really got to plan ahead, and all these tools are likely to help.
That's the plan. And really to that process, I think agents and consumers and everyone would want to see a little bit more simplification, I think, or just seeing it smoother, or seeing everything very transparently. So I think we're part of that conversation as well, to see if we can all work together to make that a bit smoother journey, because it benefits everyone in the end.
Do you think it makes the consumer think, why do we need agents if we can get all this information online?
Well, agents have, this is an evaluation estimate. Agents can come in and tell you what their knowledge about what's sold locally.
Yeah.
They can give you advice. I mean, we can do advice on the website about what might increase the value of your property. An agent will be coming and looking at your home and telling you, actually, if you painted the ceiling white and did a red front door, or, that worked really well for 2 doors down. So it's real-time intelligence on what's going on in your local market. So that's invaluable.
Now, it really sounds as though you live and breathe property as well, but there must have been some times over your career that you've had real moments of, oh my goodness, I didn't expect that to happen. Can you just give us a couple of little insights to those moments?
Over my career, I think when the Bank of England started quantitative easing in the middle of the financial crisis, that took everyone slightly by surprise, and very few of us were actually familiar with what quantitative easing was. But we had to get familiar with it very quickly for the next day's paper. So it was unprecedented what we saw during the global financial crisis. But and so you can imagine the hours for everyone. I'm sure everyone remembers that. But for us at the newspaper, it was quite intense, but it was an experience I'll never forget. I'd say, again, another unbelievable situation is the start of the pandemic, as we all went through it at the beginning of March, during March 2020, and seeing our data, the real-time data, start to reflect what was going on in the market during its closure and then its reopening, and it's stayed open, as you quite rightly said there, over the last 12 months. So so seeing that data so quickly and then it following through and coming out in other aspects of the property market was exciting to witness, although the events of the last year have been unprecedented. I use that word too many times. Everyone uses it too many, but there's another way private. But hopefully now we're moving towards the end of it.
Now, if you could wave a magic wand and improve something or change it about the industry, what would it be and why?
It would, I would come back to that point about the ease of the process and the transparency for everyone through the process. And especially recently, because we've seen so much activity in the market, that period between sale agreed and sale complete has just extended. We all know that, because everyone's working flat out. The size of the conveyancing sector and the council searches, everyone's just working flat out. But there's been so much activity, it's just taking longer. And so if that whole process could be even more transparent to make it easier for everyone to see what's happening in real time, I think that would be a real benefit to everyone.
Obviously, we've got sales and we've got lettings as consumers obviously engage with us all about things being transparent and having information at their fingertips. But from a sales perspective, I always say to my clients, if you're committed to selling and you're putting your property on the market today, I think the best advice I can give you is you instruct a solicitor today and start collating all of the legal paperwork, answering various basic questions, putting together any planning permission that you've had while you were living there, so that when you do then get a buyer, you're that much further ahead, and you've had a relationship with a solicitor, rather than waiting for that whole bundle, which is really quite daunting to come through for people that haven't moved that frequently and have to fill in all their paperwork. And I think that would be a good start, because then you can iron out with the buyers when they come to view things that you might have discovered isn't quite right, and be open about it. And I think we did sort of had hits, didn't we, a while ago, and they moved out for different reasons. But there is an element of that transparency of a hit that could benefit the sales process, in my opinion. And an area that's really something close to something that I am working on from a lettings perspective is I think that there is so much information that a tenant is now required to have, and a landlord is required to provide and produce, that there is quite a bit of work going on, which I'm involved with different people on, for the unique property reference numbers, where a property, or every property has a unique property reference number. And if we can attach to that all of the legalities that are required from a lettings perspective, and it could also probably definitely be used for sales, then the consumer can have confidence that they can look at that unique property reference number and see that property is compliant, and before they go and make some kind of decision to transact with it and spend money. And I think this is the next step that everyone needs to get behind, and because the consumer is crying out for it. And as an industry, we all are, everyone wants to reduce the amount of time that things are taking to get through, because it costs everybody a lot more money. There is technology now, and there is the skill set that across all different stakeholders need to pull together. Does anyone view on that? Is it something that people think that we would all benefit from?
Well, I think we do speak about the home information pack a lot, because that you've got the information to hand almost immediately, and we often say it's a shame that hasn't been brought back again. And even with our cars, we have our cars MOT'd. Why not our houses? There's so much going on in the property industry at the moment with carbon emissions. I mean, look at the housing stock in the UK. Actually, that's an interesting question, Grainne. Are more people looking for brand new homes, or, in Brighton and Hove, we've got lots of Victorian and Edwardian homes. Do people still like the character of old properties, or do they like the fresh, new, all singing, all dancing, brand new homes?
I think there's a market for every type of home, just depending on your buyer. We have seen, we've seen demand for all homes rise, but we have seen a specific rise for demand in new homes. And that was a lot to do with just towards the end of 2020 with the Help to Buy caps change that happened in April. So people were looking to take advantage of the old system before those caps were applied. But we're still seeing rising demand for new homes. But for all property types, I think there's some people who want to buy doer-uppers, and there's some people who want to buy turnkey properties. So I think it's just a case of individual preference.
Stamp duty, Grainne, that must have had a huge impact on the house buying last year.
Yes, and the scale of the stamp duty holiday was big. So that was savings of up to £15,000. Now, the average saving was probably closer to 5,000 just because of the value of stock that was being transacted. But even now, we know that going forward with the stamp duty extension, even up to 250, so that's zero stamp duty to pay, up to £250,000 to the end of September. So realistically, if you're getting involved in the market now, that's probably the exemption you're going to get. But even that, I mean, over 70% of homes in the north of England listed currently are under £250,000, so you're paying no stamp duty at all. So it's definitely a benefit. What we did see, and what I mentioned before, was the level of activity we were seeing in January and February this year was still happening, regardless of the fact that people were not expecting any stamp duty because they thought they'd missed the deadline in March. And so the announcement of the extension meant that they would benefit, but it's definitely boosted the market. You would go for the stamp duty holiday if you were planning on moving anyway, rather than waiting till afterwards. But first-time buyers, don't forget, don't pay any stamp duty up to $300,000 on properties worth $500,000. So they'll just carry on, and we can see activity among first-time buyers starting to rise again this year. They were squeezed last year because of mortgage finance availability, but that's opening up, and we've got the 95% mortgage guarantee. So sorry, you asked me about stamp duty, and I ended up talking about mortgages. But
doesn't matter. They're all linked, aren't they?
They are indeed.
I mean, we just saw that house prices went up because people who are thinking, well, actually, I've made a saving because I'm not paying stamp duty now. I can afford to pay a little bit more. So I'm not sure. I might call it a bit of market meddling. I'm not sure whether that's the correct term, but it is very difficult saving up for a deposit nowadays, most definitely.
But I would also say the upward pressure on pricing is becoming because of constrained supply into the market. We've just seen that level of demand, and it hasn't really been matched by the new level of supply coming into the market, especially it started to rise maybe towards the end of last year, but constrained again in this first lockdown. And so there's real evidence that people, perhaps some vendors, just with the third spike, a little bit more cautious about having viewings in. But as the numbers come down in the UK, as they are dramatically at the moment, we expect that supply to pick up. So perhaps not putting just quite so much upward pressure on pricing.
Now, we interviewed before Christmas an author called Jane Christmas, actually, and she wrote this fantastic book called Open House, A Life in 32 Moves. I don't know if you've read it, Grainne.
You've got to go for the extra 10.
But it was a great read. And actually, Jane is Canadian, and of course, getting to grips with the British system, the conveyancing system. But I loved one of her quotes, and she said, "You cannot judge a British house by its curb appeal." Now, obviously, as estate agents, we're always gone on about curb appeal, make the house look lovely from the outside, hanging baskets, cut the lawn. What would Zoopla tell us about the curb appeal of British properties?
I think we would follow the agent's advice. You want to make it as appealing from the outside. But I agree with her quote. You can't really tell until you're inside a property or round the back of a property. There could be anything behind there. There could be lots of woodlands. You could be looking onto a beautiful view. In the property itself, the layout might just suit you down to the ground. It may be quirky, but just what you want, or it may be beautifully spacious and all knocked through and exactly what you're looking for. So curb appeal can be enhanced. I think it's not a static factor in a house. So I would say most buyers would probably take it on board, but really start to think about the fundamentals of the house.
The trouble is, when I go into a house, it doesn't matter which house, I'm looking all around and I'm thinking, now, what would I do with this property? Would I take that wall down? Would I put an extra room in? We've got evidence in the media that a lot of people have been undertaking DIY. That, again, in itself means that there are new skills being learned. There are more ideas that can come forward on trends. What can Zoopla give to the consumer or perhaps a first-time buyer on what to do with their property as they're moving in, perhaps budgeting for all of that? What sort of advice would you give to a first-time buyer in that situation?
We've got a lot of stories on our site looking at exactly those problems. So what kind of colour scheme are you going to go for? How are you going to lay out your home? How to create a home working area? So it's lots of advice in this kind of strand of how to make your house a home. If you're looking for those kind of tips, we've got those kind of stories as well, apart from the stories that are just led purely by data, which is what I'm doing day in, day out. Mm-hmm. But we've got a lot of advice coming from all sorts of other areas, really helpful tips and insight into what you might be able to do with your home.
Obviously, I know you do a lot with the stats and the forecasting, but where do you think the next tool is coming from that the consumer is looking for to make their house search easier, and from both a buyer and a tenant's perspective? Have you got any predictions there?
Do you mean in terms of what Zoopla can offer, or do you mean in the wider prop tech industry?
Zoopla, you know, with the trends that you're seeing, where you think it would go next in terms of making it the whole process.
I would probably say something about the tool which allows you to remember your searches and then go back to them, compare them. Yes, so something that allows you, the way you would do in your shopping basket in Amazon, to kind of tag and go back rather than having to start from scratch every time you go in. Yeah,
definitely, because it's also trying to get the consumer to understand that tool's there, because I think one of the really good tools that Zoopla has, which is you have those heat maps to show people, you know, the activity in the market in the area they're looking at, and that sometimes works for investors, not just people that are looking to buy a house, but also people that are looking to see the demand of the house they might be selling. And often people just look at the basic maps but don't switch it to the tool that you've got. And it's not just having the tool available, it's making sure they actually know the benefit of how to use it to make an informed decision. And it's because I feel that people are always challenging us about, in a constructive way, about, you know, the latest app or the latest tool to use to get the most out of it. And as I was talking to you, I was just thinking, maybe with all the insights that you have and where you think Zoopla will be going potentially next from a consumer perspective, in terms of that's useful. I agree with you on that. I think the saved element of searches, I think that totally makes sense, because that's what people are used to using in other platforms and in other areas of their life. So it's sort of you know, with that journey on their property search. I agree.
But there's the age-old question, James. You know, when people come in and we say, what are you looking for? And they'll say, oh, well, we want a 2-bedroom, whatever it is. And then they'll buy something completely different. And yet they'll say, well, why have you sent me this property? This isn't what I asked for. And if we look at the percentage of people who actually buy what they started out looking for, because it is a complete journey, you know, you don't go into an estate agents and buy something the next day. Will that day ever come? No. I wonder. Anyway, that's for another time. You don't actually have a choice. You have to take what is available most of the time. So, you know, something where you can actually follow your journey through, and actually from start to finish, from sort of the first property to your last property. Oh, look where we've been. Look how this has happened. You know, if I went through Land Registry to see all the places where we've lived, I have to go in lots and lots of different times. Whereas if I had all of that together as a tool, my goodness, wouldn't that make it easier?
One of the questions I have is talking about where we think Zoopla would be looking to develop the next tool to help the consumer with their property search journey. Have you got any insight into where you think that would go?
Well, I think one of the things we're looking at is having a kind of tagging system, so people can go in and resume their search and save houses that they're interested in and compare and contrast, much like we're used to in many other ways in which we look at goods before we buy them. So rather than having to start from scratch, you're able to compare and contrast online, and the tool is really for you, for your search. And that is what we want it to be really helpful to individuals as they start their property search.
But I think that's a great idea.
Yeah,
I mean, if you go into
brilliant.
like the insurance market, you can compare that insurance against that insurance and the different cover you get. If you could put two houses in a price bracket, say I was buying something at 250,000 within perhaps two streets of one another, and one was 81 square meters and the other one was 79 square meters, but there was an extra bedroom in another, it compares it so visually, doesn't it?
Yeah,
we're used to dealing with square feet and square meters, and if somebody says to you, oh well, it's the size of a football pitch, I go, what's the size of a football pitch? I can't actually envisage it. So these compare and contrast tools, I think, would be wonderful, because it would show value for money as well, wouldn't it? That's got a bigger garden than that one. That's actually got a room in the roof, whereas that one hasn't. So I love this idea. I really do.
Yeah. And as you say, it's never going to be like for like. It's not going to be three exact properties. It's going to be bits of some properties that's a winner, and then there's bits of others that perhaps less so. So it's always going to be a bit of a hard decision at the end, I think.
Radio Reverb 97.2.
Now, obviously, we put a lot of money into properties. There's a huge financial investment, but there's also, with the stress, etc., related to moving and choosing where to go, a huge emotional investment. Is there any way we could analyse the emotional investment that people make?
How we analyse it in facts and figures, because of course that's exactly what I want to do, work in research department. How we get that onto a spreadsheet? But I think it's the only way we can just try and make it easier. I think as an industry, if we just try and make it easier, but there's no getting around it. You might be moving to be closer to a family network. How do you encapsulate that in an Excel spreadsheet? You just can't. So, or you might be moving for work, or you might be moving because you want your children to go to a different school. So there's all of those aspects that we have to take into consideration, and they're all big emotional decisions. And then obviously the home that you move to, whether, is it the right decision? Will it suit your family once you've moved in? Most of the time we find the answer is a big yes. But it's an emotion. It definitely is an emotional journey too. But I think all we can do is make it as simple as possible, but recognise that is the case. This is not a purely financial investment decision for people up and down the country.
I think we have a lot of these chats, don't we, James, about how perhaps the general public don't know. For example, we have to go through a lot of GDPR questions. We have to go through anti-money laundering. And then the solicitors come along and they want GDPR and anti-money laundering. And every single move through the property buying or even the property renting is just fraught with more paperwork, more documentation. And I think you're absolutely right, making it easier for people on an emotional level, taking out the stress. And I mean, we get stressed for our own clients, don't we, James? When we know they've got a deadline, they have to be out by that date, they need to move in by that particular date. And it's really very, very stressful for all of us. So just cutting out some of those layers of paperwork and checks and everything, I do recognise that they need to be done, but I just think there's too many overlaps. So just people sitting around the table and saying, right, us as agents, you as solicitors, you as the local council, returning your searches, you as this, you as that, it should be a lot simpler. But I think, again, with all the research tools, that should take out a lot of the toing and fro. We used to have to get in our cars, didn't we, and go and have a look at the property. We can go on Google Maps now and have a look.
And even signing documents online. It came in during COVID, didn't it? That you could sign documents online, which was a game, and then send them to the land registry. Tiny shift, massive difference. But even if you work within the parameters of the kind of paperwork you need to do at the moment, even if everyone involved in the process can see at which stage you're at and what's happening and why. There must be, that there's an element of reassurance, as you said, that this is all happening. So you're secure in this massive investment you're making. There is security checks going on all the time to make sure everything's as it should be. And so it's just even maybe making that seeable. So it's not just, you're doing that, but does everyone in the process know that that's currently what's going on? So any cutting of red tape is obviously very welcome at all times.
We used to see, I was originally from the north, from Manchester, living down south, and we still get a lot of London people wanting to move down, obviously, to Brighton and Hove. There's a very good railway network. We've got the sea, we've got some fantastic restaurant, clubs, museums, we've got 2 universities. In your February house price index, there's some, the northern cities seem to be doing very, very well, particularly alluded to Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds and Nottingham leading on city price growth. Now, do you see the northern markets attracting more people purely from, you did allude to the prices earlier on in our chat, plus all the investment that's going on, plus talk of moving government departments up there and departments of the BBC, etc. Is there going to be a complete turnaround?
We certainly see that the headroom for growth has been greater in the north because the affordability rates are just lower. So capital values are lower. You'll know that from your moves. So there's just less headroom for growth maybe in the south and southeast, especially as in the, in some industries having rising unemployment at the moment. So in the north, there's more headroom for growth, but it does feed into the levelling up agenda, which means more jobs are going up north as well. So some people may have made that move already, moving further out from the centre of those northern cities, reinvigorating some markets, perhaps in the wider commuter zones. Even what's happened with COVID, it's got further to run. If you've got government departments moving thousands and thousands of jobs up north, that trend is only going to increase. However, I don't think it's not just a zero-sum game. I think you can still see high levels of demand in the southeast. There's just the housing stock, the population there just means there's going to be demand and people wanting to be close to the coast, down on the south coast where you are. So that's been a perennial. We've seen it pick up during COVID. It's just in terms of price growth, perhaps less headroom for growth because of that affordability constraint.
So also with the stamp duty holidays, of course, you can probably get better value in the north of England. How would it look if lots of people started investing from the south in the north? What sort of effect would that have? What would your data show?
As landlords or as moving up to live there? So if there was more investment into the buy-to-let sector, I mean, we'd see a rise in available properties to let and the kind of mortgages being granted. At the moment, we have seen some buy-to-let investors coming into the market. The mortgage numbers have risen slightly since that stamp duty holiday because it makes it more attractive for them. But we haven't recovered to the levels that we saw in 2016 before the additional 3% stamp duty was introduced. So I think wherever landlords are based, I mean, it's going to be the decision about it has more impact perhaps on the agents as whether they're going to be property managers for a landlord who isn't local. But for people who are living, it's all about the rental stock and the availability of rental property. We know that it's constrained and it's constrained nearly everywhere in the UK. So any more kind of investment coming in to create more rental property could be a positive move. If it's in the right price bands and it's in the right area, it could be a positive.
And do we know where perhaps people are hankering to go? Does your data say, well, there may be areas that perhaps are up and coming, where people are moving in, and if they don't know where the next go-to place is, would your data tell them that so they could say, well, look, this is having a lot of people moving in there. I think it'd be a great place to go. Look, they're building this, that and the other. How would that work?
So we've got kind of different ways of looking at all of that, and we have a regular series of articles that come out that look at this aspect of our data. So if we just put out a big old report with all of that information in, I mean, everyone would be, I love a spreadsheet, but not everyone does. Do you get it? So some of our wonderful colleagues at Zoopla then turn that into kind of stories to tell the story of what's going on. And recently we've done where are some of the most affordable places in the UK. So if that's the crux of what you need, you're flexible and you can live anywhere in the UK. It doesn't apply to many people, but if even within a region, we can tell you where's the most affordable place at the moment to be, or which markets are moving fastest, which are the most active markets, which are the most, what's happening at the moment there, or where has equity risen most. So if you're a home mover, should you just go and check out your equity at the moment? Have you actually amassed more than you thought you had? So we're looking at it all the time. So again, if people sign up to Zoopla, they should be getting all of this information direct into their inbox. And I'm talking about examples from literally the last 2 months. So we're regularly looking at this in different ways to try and share that information with people.
James, wouldn't you agree this is music to our ears? And it should be music to lots of people's ears as well.
I touched on it earlier. I've actually signed up as a consumer myself, so I can recognise those examples that Grainne's just given regarding those updates, and that's me as a professional in the industry, because if you need to know what your consumers are reading and what they're being told by different platforms, so it's good to know. And people are just more interested in this information now, even if they haven't got the actual intention to actually make that necessarily move. They're just interested. It's a talking point. People do use it to make informed decisions, but sometimes it's just they're interested. So it is good. And I think the more people are not so much into spreadsheets, but there more and more people are into data now. They really are, which is a good thing, and there's the amount of people that sign up now for these just general alerts around property is really, really spiked. And it's being able to translate that data into what's relevant to them. And that's what we touched on earlier, I think, about there's a place for all these resources. But if you really want to know what's going on in your street, your road, your city, your town, and how you can buy what's right for what you're looking for, you do need to speak to someone on the ground that's local that can actually really direct you to say, well, actually, I know what you're saying, that's what you're looking for, and this is what you need for your family. So therefore, if you could just widen your search slightly, you'll get it here. And you can't always get that online because it doesn't tell you that much detail. So that using all of this in line with some local professional people's journey should be reasonably straightforward. We can't help the conveyance at the moment, but we can do the rest of it.
Grainne, do you like moving house?
No, I have moved once, and I moved into a property in London and haven't moved since. So I'm possibly not the best case study, but I have been involved in lots of family moving house and friends doing the same, and been involved in viewings, a lot of viewings. So I have some experience. But myself, no, I've stayed in one place. I found the right place when I started.
I mean, I love going into places and thinking, well, what would I do with this? And I love refurbishing. That's why I've actually moved a lot of times. I like the older character property. In fact, I had a call from a young lady today who said, I said, well, what type of property do you want? And she said, oh, I haven't really thought about it. She's got her mortgage. When we sort of drilled down, she actually wanted something with real character. And I thought, well, that's unusual. I thought a lot of younger people would go for the modern purpose-built, but they don't. They still hanker after these properties with character and high ceilings and fireplaces. And you just think, well, is that because we all need a little bit of comfort after the last 12 months, where we really feel wrapped up in our homes and cozy and safe, etc. So it's really interesting where people's views come from the property they actually want to move into, which actually brings me to my almost last question. Grainne, imagine that I wake up tomorrow and I throw back the covers and I shout, I'm moving to the north. Okay, so I'm 18 years old. I've just decided I'm going to move away from home, go back up north. What should I be checking? Are there any particular areas on Zoopla that you would suggest I look at before I just grab a train ticket and leap on a train and go up north? Oh, I've got a little bit of an inheritance in my back pocket as well from my grandmother.
Wonderful. So again, it comes down to we can hopefully help you sort of narrow your search before you get on to your local agent to really help you with that search, or see sign up to see what's available. It's really going to depend on your individual circumstances. So Are you working there? Do you need to commute into a job in the city, or are you based out on a farm? I don't know, on the lambing season. What amenities do you want nearby? These are the kind of things you're going to want to think about. Transport links. I mean, you're moving to the north. It's wonderful. Do you need to come back to the south to see family, or do you need to go to Scotland, or your family are based in Europe? Do you need to be near an airport? So it's all of these factors together. And I'm not trying to get out of answering the question, but I mean, I could say Wigan, because really positive rental growth. But unless you're considering all of these factors, it may be the right, it may not be the right answer, or the commuter zones in and around Manchester, or perhaps up in or further down, you could be up in Newcastle, or in the wider commuter zones around then. So it really depends on your own individual circumstances. And again, this is something I hope Zoopla can help with your search. So you start to think about kind of information about transport links in a certain area, transport times, cost of that, cost of commuting. These are all things that we've looked at over the last year or so on the website. So you'll be able to find information out on all of those factors before you make a decision about where you want to move. Also, is it city northern living or rural northern living?
You're absolutely right. I think this is it. Sometimes we do things and we don't know why we do them, but actually with a little bit of planning, we probably make our complete journey a whole lot simpler. James, what would you like to ask just to finish?
Well, actually, I think you've done a really good job answering lots of our questions, even if we have put you on the spot. So I have managed to get a lot of my questions out there, but just to cross over between your experience in the financial world in terms of mortgages and also your role at Zoopla, is what advice would you give people about what they should look at in terms of their mortgage position before they do get on and start really falling in love with something they've seen on Zoopla, wherever that may be?
So this is where kind of an online mortgage calculator or a mortgage broker can be invaluable, because when you put in your earnings, your household earnings, any deposit that you've amassed, you'll begin to see what level of mortgage you're looking at, because it's not only what's immediately available, it's the stress testing that the lender will also put your income under. So it's you can get a broad ballpark figure quite quickly from experts or online, or from your bank if you're talking to them about mortgages. You could get a ballpark. So then you're looking at the right area, and you're not looking in a price band perhaps that you then find you can't get a mortgage offer for. So I think it's a really good idea to get in early and figure out what your income is going to pass in terms of a stress test for a mortgage quite early on, and then you're looking in the right areas at the right price.
Yeah, but at least you can fall in love with something that you can afford, as opposed to be really disappointed.
That's
and a lot of people don't even know the stress test terminology, and it is a whole other terminology, isn't it? Like loads of different words. Yeah, I agree with that.
Absolutely
that
true. Grainne, thank you so much for joining us. I'm
Pleasure.
so pleased we've managed to see you this afternoon rather than just, online audio. So can you just tell our listeners where they can find out more about Zoopla?
So they can find Zoopla at zoopla.co.uk, and on the website there are stories. You can find that under Discover or News and Guides. There are houses, properties, flats with gardens, flats near the sea, houses near the sea, any type of property you might want to have a look for. All the search terms are in there. You can look for properties that are happy to take pets. You can, if you're looking in the rental accommodation, you can isolate by balconies. So anything you want. We have all the property listings, or a good proportion of them, on there. And so go on and have a look if you're thinking of buying. Obviously, if you're a first-time buyer, there'll be tools on there to help you decide what you should be looking at and where. And if you're a home mover and you're thinking, is it time for me to move? Go to the homeowners page, check out our estimate, get in touch with your local agent, get a valuation, and take your journey from there.
My thanks to Grainne Gilmore, Head of Research at Zoopla, and James Duffy, Compliance Guru at Callaway's. This is Heather Hilder-Darling of Let's Talk Property on Radio Reverb, 97.2 FM and DAB.